This evening, we thank you all for watching. Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team is all set to take things from here. Miss Shannon,
hey, listen,
take it away.
We've got a copy of that book as well. No photoshopping either, Laura. Thank you so much. Here is what's happening on Fox News at Night. Explosive allegations by a top Democrat that the fix was in to give Hillary Clinton the nomination. The party leaders say there's nothing to see here. It's a growing scandal for Democrats tonight.
What we've got to do as Democrats now is we've got to hold this party accountable.
We'll break down the president's exclusive interview, slamming political opponents over the infamous Trump dossier.
But that dossier is a disgrace, and it should not have been allowed to be used.
Then new evidence that special counsel Robert Mueller's case may be compromised. And can freezing the assets of the lone wolf terrorist somehow prevent future attacks? Hear from a Democrat who wants Congress to approve his plan before he says it's too late. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Controversy inside the Democratic Party about to explode into open warfare. It's coming at the party elites from several fronts. Just yesterday, the left-leaning New Yorker ran a story headlined, "The Democratic Civil War is getting nasty, even if no one is paying attention." That story about how Democrats are still repeating the same old mistakes by focusing on identity politics rather than things like the economy. Meanwhile, former DNC chairwoman Donna Brazile is leveling shocking charges of collusion and rigging by her own party. Our chief national correspondent Ed Henry kicks off our coverage tonight. Good evening, Ed.
Shannon, great to see you. This is amazing because think about the daily drumbeat from Democratic Party officials charging that President Trump is not telling the truth about any given issue, and the Democrats' daily obsession for months now about how concerned they are about the integrity of the 2016 election and allegations of collusion. This book by Donna Brazile lays bare that Democratic Party officials destroyed the integrity of their own Democratic primaries in 2016. Colluded, that's the word, colluded to rig those primaries in favor of Hillary Clinton and her campaign. That's according to Brazile. And then they repeatedly lied to the American people and their own party grassroots with claims they were being fair to Senator Bernie Sanders. Well, it's interesting. Tonight, President Trump, in this interview with Laura Ingraham, said all of this was dishonest.
That is a big story, what she's saying. It's illegal, number one. And it's really very unfair to Bernie Sanders. I'm not a Bernie Sanders fan, although I must say I got a lot of his votes. When he was thrown out, many of those people voted for me because of trade, because I agreed with him on trade.
Politico magazine has an excerpt from Brazile's new book, and here it is. It's published, an excerpt from it, where she recounts taking over the DNC in the summer of 2016 and learning it was broke and being propped up by the Clinton camp because Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz's team had quietly signed a deal with the Clinton camp in which Clinton agreed to raise money for the DNC to keep them afloat in exchange for her seizing control of the DNC's strategy, spending, and personnel decisions, all happening in private back in 2015, months before ballots started to be cast, while the DNC was publicly claiming to Sanders and the rest of the world that they were neutral. Brazile writing, quote, "If the fight had been fair, one campaign would not have control of the party before the voters had decided which one they wanted to lead. This was not a criminal act," she writes, "but as I saw it, it compromised the party's integrity." Now, the Brazile confession has the air of someone trying to cleanse her own conscience, because remember, when she was at CNN in the last campaign, she got caught steering questions to Hillary Clinton before a candidates forum with Sanders after denying it to Fox. Watch.
You get it. You know, as a Christian woman, I understand persecution, but I will not sit here and be persecuted because your information is totally false.
Plus, last March, Brazile seemed to mislead about Clinton collusion, telling Time magazine, "In reality, not only was I not playing favorites, the more competitive and heated the primary got, the harder DNC staff worked to be scrupulously fair and beyond reproach. In all the months the Russians monitored the DNC's email, they found just a handful of inappropriate emails with no sign of anyone taking action to disadvantage the Sanders campaign." By the way, Sanders had no comment. Wasserman Schultz says she's proud of her work at the DNC. But Shannon, what Donna Brazile was writing in March in Time magazine, that there was no collusion, everything was fine, is the complete opposite of what she's doing now as she tries to sell this book.
Yeah, exactly. It's a totally different story, and it's very illustrative. So much more to come.
Good to see you. Have a good show.
Thank you, Ed. All right, so was it a vast right-wing conspiracy, Jim Comey, the Russians, or the Democrats' own troubles that led to Hillary Clinton's stunning loss? And are Democrats addressing their internal problems in time for the next election. Joining us now, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz and Senior Director of Research for Bustle.com and author of America in the Age of Trump, Jessica Tarlov. Both are Fox News contributors. Good to see you both tonight.
Good evening and congratulations.
Good evening.
Thank you very much. I want to start off with a little bit more of an excerpt from Donna Brazil's book that we saw today and get you all to react to this. She talks about this agreement that Hillary's camp had reached with the DNC. She says the agreement specified that in exchange for raising money and investing in the DNC, Hillary would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. The Victory Fund agreement, however, had been signed in August 2015. Just 4 months after Hillary announced her candidacy and nearly a year before she officially had the nomination. Jessica, I got to tell you, on the floor of the DNC convention last year, I got an earful from Bernie supporters who always felt like the fix had been in. This seems to vindicate a lot of what they thought.
Well, it does, but it's not the full story, and I'm surprised that Donna Brazil didn't actually represent all the facts here. Bernie Sanders himself signed a joint fundraising agreement. He just never raised any money for down-ballot Democrats or anyone for himself. He went his own way. This agreement actually is quite common. Al Gore signed one. John Kerry signed one as well. And Donna Brazil left that side of the story completely out. I realize she's trying to sell books, but you can already see that she's backpedaling. If you look at her Twitter feed right now, she's retweeted something from her own Jamu Green, who says that none of the, quote, revelations that came out in this piece or this excerpt so far changed one primary vote. And then there's another tweet that she's retweeted that says that
Hillary Clinton's campaign had taken control of the fundraising, the strategy, the messaging, the press releases, everything months and months before we even got to the primary contest. How can you say that this didn't have some kind of impact?
No, I'm not saying that it didn't have any impact. I'm saying that Donna Brazil is not telling the full story. She's making it out that Bernie Sanders was just this victim on the side here, when those of us who are following the campaign closely, which is everyone here on this panel, know that he was out there dragging Hillary's name through the mud. He said that she wasn't qualified. He said over and over he doesn't associate it with the Democrats. He's not even running as a Democrat now. So I do have some sympathy here for the Clinton side about, you know, what the money that was raised for the DNC and down ballot candidates, which Bernie did not help us with.
Okay, let's bring in former Congressman Chaffetz here, because I want to read a little bit of what Debbie Wasserman Schultz has said as well, because she was the head of the chair of the DNC at the time. She says this: with Donald Trump in the White House, Democrats must stay focused on enacting a progressive agenda to protect our citizens, our values, and our democracy, and remain united towards our goal of electing Democratic congressional majorities in 2018. I heard nothing of a denial or an explanation about why that Victory Fund agreement would have been reached. And as Jessica said, others have signed those, but generally, according to what Donna Brazil said, it doesn't happen until they become the nominee. This was way ahead of that.
Well, the reality is Democrats were in debt. And so, yes, most members, including myself, have done joint fundraising agreements. But what is markedly different and totally unacceptable, and I believe could potentially be money laundering, is to put into the contract that that money then would go back to the DNC and essentially be under Hillary Clinton's control. There are reasons there are campaign finance limits in there, and this looks like a very concerted effort to bypass all of those so that she could maintain control. You can't do that. That's not only unethical, but remember, Donna Brazil is calling this proof, using her words, not mine, proof that this thing was rigged.
Well, and we're also hearing from one of your former colleagues, Congressman, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She obviously was very supportive of Bernie Sanders. She had a lot to say during the campaign and clearly was very upset about the way she thought he was being treated. Today she said that no more of this, no more picking winners and losers. We have to take back our party. It should belong to the people. We have to be a lot more transparent. Jessica, are there lessons to be learned from this?
Oh, yes, I hope so, absolutely. And I wasn't a fan of what happened with Tulsi Gabbard and the way that she left the mainstream of the party to go out there for Bernie Sanders. But I completely agree with her. There is no doubt about it that the Democrats have a lot of work to do, and we are clearly still a broken party. Elizabeth Warren said tonight that this was confirmation that Hillary Clinton rigged the election. So we can see, you know, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren shifting over here, and then we have the center of the party. And we're going to have to see how it plays out. But Democrats must learn from these mistakes. The GOP is very weak right now and very fractured, and we need to get it together to be able to take advantage of that in the coming elections.
And Congressman, I'm hoping I'm thinking you're hoping in 2018 they don't learn a lesson. They don't get it together.
Hey, go ahead and put up Hillary Clinton again. But the reality is, since Barack Obama took office, if you look at state legislators, governors, House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency, I think the Democrats lost something like 900 seats.
It's actually 1,000, just to be honest.
Look at Jessica giving you the spot on this.
You could say, you could say that Republicans are broken, but things are going pretty well right now. I will also say that this has moved above and beyond just a squabble within the Democratic Party. This potentially is millions of dollars of money that has been laundered. The Department of Justice should swoop in there and take a nonpartisan view of this and look at that contract, because there are a lot of us that believe that that is money laundering.
All right,
Congressman, I would just like to say, I mean, on Mueller week, where there was a guilty plea in the indictment and you haven't gotten health care and you're probably not going to get tax reform.
Don't change the subject. Come on, Jessica.
Okay, let's focus.
Going well.
Let's focus. This was about Donna Brazile and the allegations that she made from inside the party. That is something we can't solve right now, but we will continue to parse this out, and we'll see if the DOJ gets involved. Congressman Jessica, great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shannon.
Thank you.
This is a Fox News alert. Brand new developments in the Russia investigations coming straight from the House Intelligence Committee rather than the special counsel's office tonight. The left claims they found yet another smoking gun, but there's a whole lot more to this story. Kristen Fisher is here with the very latest claims involving Attorney General Jeff Sessions and one-time campaign volunteer Carter Page. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, tonight, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is under renewed scrutiny thanks to two former Trump campaign associates, Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. Now, let's start with Page, because today he was on Capitol Hill testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, and he told them that during the campaign, he did tell then Senator Sessions about an upcoming trip to Russia. Now, if true, that's important, because Sessions has repeatedly testified under oath that he was not aware of any communications between Trump campaign associates and Russian officials. But tonight, Page is downplaying that encounter with Sessions to Fox by saying this, quote, back in June 2016, I mentioned in passing that I happened to be planning to give a speech at a university in Moscow, completely unrelated to my limited volunteer role with the campaign, and as I've done dozens of times throughout my life. Understandably, it was as irrelevant then as it is now. The Attorney General is also coming under fire for this photo of a meeting with then-candidate Trump and George Papadopoulos, who later pled guilty to lying to the FBI. According to court documents, at that meeting, Papadopoulos says he told everyone in the room that he could use his connections to set up a meeting with Mr. Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, if true, that could contradict what Sessions said under oath back in June. Listen.
I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials concerning any type of interference with any campaign or election in the United States. Further, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign.
Well, Democrats are already pouncing on the possible discrepancy. Senator Patrick Leahy said today, quote, the description of the March 2016 meeting contained in unsealed court documents is impossible to reconcile with the Attorney General's appearance before the Judiciary Committee just 2 weeks ago. They now want the Attorney General to testify before the committee again to clarify. And then there's the other big news of the day. Paul Manafort and Rick Gates back in court for the very first time since turning themselves in on Monday. Today, their attorneys argued that they do not pose a flight risk, that they're simply international political consultants whose jobs require them to have multiple passports and overseas bank accounts. But the judge shot down their efforts to ease the conditions of their bail. She refused to release them from home confinement and refused to allow them to take off their GPS electronic monitoring devices, though she did say that she would be open to reconsidering the next time they're in court, which is Monday, Shannon.
And we will be there. All right, Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. Our next guest says there is evidence that the special counsel Robert Mueller's probe is compromised. He's calling for his resignation. Arizona Congressman Trent Franks is here to explain. Good to see you tonight, sir.
And you, this is great, your new show here. You picked a week that there's nothing happening.
We wanted it to be a really newsy one, so
yes,
we scheduled it accordingly. We thank you for coming in live tonight with us to talk about this. You know, I know you and others have raised concerns about Robert Mueller. There are other Republicans who say they want to see him protected. They've introduced legislation. Lindsey Graham said earlier this week there would be holy hell to pay if the president tries to get rid of him. Do you think he should be fired?
I think that he should step down, Shannon. I am convinced that the evidence is pretty clear that he has a conflict of interest. His closeness to Mr. Comey is incontrovertible, and this means that even in my judgment, the appointment process itself was a compromised situation. If you look at where the probe is going now, it seems to be going in a lot of different directions, and these things kind of run off the rails at times, and I'm very concerned about that, especially with some of the people that Mr. Mueller has hired and brought alongside of him, and I see them almost like they're doing something with organized crime here, and usually that puts a lot of fear in the people that they arrest early, and sometimes even if they're trying to do the situation honestly, sometimes it means that the people that are on the line will say something that maybe is not true or overstate their case against their superior, and it has a pretty corrosive effect.
Are you of the Steve Bannon belief that Congress should cut off money, or should set a limit on the money, or that the White House should be slow in producing documents when it comes to cooperating with Mr. Mueller?
No, I think that we should cooperate with Mr. Mueller until there's something that is incontrovertible and clear that he is doing something wrong. But I am convinced that Mr. Mueller puts a pall on the entire process when he ignores this conflict that he obviously has.
Okay, I want to read something from Senator Blumenthal, of course a Democrat over on the Senate side. He has this to say about where we are right now with these indictments this week and the one plea deal that we saw as well. He said, there are clearly facts and evidence that show collusion by the Trump campaign with the Russians, at least individuals involved in the Trump campaign. We are nowhere near the end of this investigation. There's a lot more to be known. And obviously there are congressional investigations going along with what the special counsel. This is the first time I've heard somebody step up and say, though, that they have evidence of collusion.
Well, then we need to see that, because we certainly haven't seen it yet. The one collusion evidence that we have seen, of course, is the Uranium One deal. If you really want to look at that clearly, this same month that the Uranium One deal was accomplished, Bill Clinton was paid $500,000. Now that's, for just one speaking engagement, that's 5 times as much as the Russians spent on their famous Facebook ads, and half of those ran after the election, and half of those were pro-Hillary ads. So it's astonishing to me that sometimes we get all twisted off here. And of course, millions of dollars after that flowed into the Clinton Foundation coffers. And so if you really want to look at collusion, there it is. I mean, you can't avoid that. But I would just challenge Senator Blumenthal to show us his evidence, because I think some of these guys should have been looking for Osama bin Laden a lot sooner, because they're finding something where nobody else can.
Well, and we know that the House has now launched investigations with regard to Fusion GPS, the dossier, and Uranium One as well. So we look forward to having you back to talk about developments on those.
I look forward to it, and again, congratulations.
Thank you. Good to see you tonight. Well, for 11 minutes today, President Trump's Twitter account disappeared. So if you tried to view @RealDonaldTrump, instead you got this message saying, sorry, that page doesn't exist. Now, as you can imagine, with this president having more than 41 million followers, the Twitter sphere immediately lit up, speculating as to what could have happened. Twitter has issued a statement in a tweet to explain, saying the president's account was inadvertently deactivated due to human error by a Twitter employee. Now, just now, we got another follow-up. Twitter says this. A new post says it was done by a customer support employee who did it on their last day. That's one way to go out. Twitter says the incident is under investigation and steps are being taken to stop that from happening again. Well, as President Trump prepares to head to Asia, there are growing calls for the administration to take tough new steps against North Korea. Our next guest, House Foreign Affairs Chairman Ed Royce, says there is simply no excuse for any delay any longer. At this late hour, we're getting reports of renewed outrage from North Korea on the eve of the president's departure for the Pacific Rim. The North Koreans claiming that Trump has ordered B-1 bombers to stage a mock nuclear attack on the Hermit Kingdom. It reportedly caused panic in the capital, Pyongyang. The Pentagon confirms it did run a joint mission with the South Korean Air Force involving B-1s from Guam. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce has called for a supercharged response to North Korea. So is this what you had in mind, Mr. Chairman? The flyover today, it sounds like we're demonstrating a little show of force.
Well, Shannon, let me explain that we're in a situation right now where, and we got details about this from our hearing yesterday, where we had the highest ranking minister from North Korea ever to testify, or defector ever to testify before Congress, about how close they are. And we know a lot about the threats they're making to the United States. We need a credible deterrence that sends the message that, no, we are serious. This concept that they have of threatening the United States, we have to take decisive action now. And part of that is going to be this upcoming trip to try to cut off the currency that North Korea needs to build out its nuclear weapon system and its missile system. We have an opportunity to really pressure North Korea and cut the funds off and shut down that program.
The president spoke earlier today with our own Laura Ingraham about what actions we're taking with regard to North Korea. Here's what he said.
Most people have been saying, you know, whether it's cutting the banking system off from North Korea, whether it's cutting the oil down to North Korea, cutting supplies down. And I must tell you, North Korea is a thing that I think we will solve. And if we don't solve it, it's not going to be very pleasant for them. It's not going to be very pleasant, I guess, for anybody. But China is helping us.
Mr. Chairman, how convinced are you that China is fully on board with helping us?
China has helped us in some ways, but have not thrown themselves into this with the enthusiasm necessary to cut off and isolate North Korea in the way they could. And the importance of this trip at this moment is that we have to have their full compliance. Now, I passed legislation mandating this. If we're going to open our markets as we have to Chinese goods, they have to freeze the accounts with North Korea. We forced this once before in 2006. We've got to force that issue, and we've got to do it now. And part of the diplomatic aspects of this is to make it clear what the consequences would be, but also why it is not in China's interest to have North Korea go rogue with this capability, because then Japan and South Korea are also going to develop a nuclear weapons program. The genie will be out of the bottle.
I know that you think that we should also be pushing to add North Korea back to the list of state terror sponsors, and that would give us some more tools to work with them. But how worried are you at this point that we are headed towards some kind of military showdown with them?
I am convinced at this point they don't have the capability, right? So now is the time to cut off the ability for them to have the billions of additional dollars they need to build out the program, to miniaturize the weapon, to put it on their ICBMs. This is our last opportunity. Well, according to our defector, our minister who testified, if we listen to Tae Young-ho, he says they're on the cusp. And I think he's right. They are very, very close. So now would be the time to have their dictator not able to pay his generals, not able to pay to maintain. When we put those sanctions on in 2006, it shut down the production line for their missile program. It shut down their capabilities, and it shut down their ability to pay their officers and their army. That is not a good position for a dictator to be in, and that is, if we press China on this and give them that choice, business with the United States for these financial institutions, and cut off those accounts, or no business. Look, that's the kind of hard diplomacy we've got to do now.
And we'll be watching to see the president as he navigates all of these relationships next week. Thank you for joining us for a preview, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Well, ahead of President Trump's visit to East Asia, his daughter and top White House aide Ivanka is in Japan tonight, meeting with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and talking female empowerment in the global economy.
All too often, our workplace culture fails to treat women with appropriate respect. This takes many forms, including harassment, which can never be tolerated. Traditional and rigid business culture also fails working mothers and fathers.
White House says Ivanka will be heading back to the U.S. before the president arrives there to deal with pushing a tax reform package. Well, coming up, it's yet another unexpected problem for President Trump's top man on tax reform. Up next, we'll talk to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin about the latest challenge to the GOP's blockbuster legislation. Stick around. There's new trouble developing tonight for President Trump's economic team. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin and economic advisor Gary Cohn. A small business group is sounding very cool to the tax reform proposal circling Capitol Hill today. President Trump heading to Asia, but leaving behind Mnuchin and Cohn to put out the fires or else.
So if I have any problems, I will be blaming Mnuchin and Co. Believe me, you'll be hearing from it.
Well, President Trump says he wants to lower individual rates for low and middle income Americans, keep the highest tax bracket at 39.6%, and lower the corporate tax rate to 20%. Tonight, I spoke with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin about all that. The president says he is holding you responsible for getting this thing done. You know, over in the House, they could only lose 22 votes to get this moving. And the Senate says it's working on a plan of its own that may be substantially different. How do you get this done and to the president's desk?
Well, I think we couldn't be more excited about where we are. We've been working with the House and Senate leadership since the beginning of the year. We have everybody very close on the same page, and we're thrilled that the House came out with their vision of the bill today. So I think this is a great step forward, and we're committed to getting this to the president and having him sign it in December.
No surprise the Democrats did not like it. You'd be shocked if you didn't hear from them. I got a slew of emails today from different groups, one saying middle-class families will be taxed more, both now on student loans, mortgage interest, and medical expenses, and later in the billions this plan will add to the federal debt. Another says Republicans are moving forward with a partisan plan to raise taxes on workers and middle-class families in order to give a massive tax cut to the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations. Nancy Pelosi calls it a Ponzi scheme. She also says this about what the plan will be, in her estimation.
We are waiting in anticipation to see what further harm the Republicans will do with their deficit increasing, job killing, tax cutting for the rich bill that they're going to present.
Do you expect to get a single Democrat vote, Mr. Secretary?
I think we will. I mean, as you know, what the president has been focused on is a middle income tax cut in making our businesses competitive. And that's good for American workers. That's good for American jobs. As you know, we've had several Democrats traveling with the president when he's been out on the road, and I would expect we do get some votes.
How much pressure do you think is on those Democrats who obviously are facing, many of them, tough re-elections in red states that win for the president? Is that enough of a motivator, do you think? They don't want to be the 50th vote, but if you can get to close to that mark, will those three step up, do you think?
Well, I'm not going to comment on them specifically, but again, I think the issues we're talking about are good for America, and I think the Democrats will understand that. And issues like we've had today, where the Democrats are coming out and saying this is a tax increase for middle-class Americans, that's just not correct. And as people understand the facts, this is really what we're focused on, is something good for the middle class, good for jobs, making business competitive.
There seems to be some skepticism on other parts of the Hill as well. This is what Senator Corker, obviously a member of the GOP, had to say about how he views how this whole thing is playing out now.
There's been a general atmosphere change since the election where, we used to care about the deficit issue, and it feels like we've entered into a party atmosphere here now where, let's cut the amount of revenue that comes in, let's spend more money.
What about cutting spending?
Well, I think, first of all, Senator Corker was very helpful in us reaching the compromise to get the budget passed. And as I've gone through the numbers with him, the $1.5 trillion, we believe that that's $1 trillion once you get down to the policy. And we think there's over $2 trillion of growth. So we're focused on creating huge opportunity for Americans, huge growth, and creating additional revenues to pay down the debt.
And obviously, there's a very specific needle that you have to thread to get this through. If you're going to do it with reconciliation, which keeps you from having to go to 60 votes instead of just a simple majority, do you think that the structures of what you're seeing so far from the House, and of course we'll have to see what we get from the Senate, will be able to maintain those guidelines where you don't go too far with the deficit, if it doesn't work out over 10 years, those kinds of things?
I do. I think this is an important first step in the process. The House putting out the actual bill with all the details. They're going to have discussions in committee. The Senate is also working on their version. We hope to get this passed quickly in the House and the Senate, and then go to conference and get it to the president's desk.
What do you think is going to happen with those, the rollback of the state and local tax deductions that, you continue to hear from high tax states like New Jersey and New York? Those are key members that you'll need to hold together for this vote. You can lose some of them, but many of them are saying there's absolutely no way they'll be persuaded because for their constituents, it's just too much of a haircut.
Well, we've worked very closely, and we've had a lot of discussions with them, and I'm sympathetic to those areas. But let me just explain. For middle-class people in those states, there will be tax cuts. For rich people, people like me, the president, and others, we will get tax increases, and that's what we've said all along. The president has said what we're really focused on is cutting out a lot of the exemptions, simplifying the tax, and what he wants to do is a middle-income tax cut. And to the extent that in those states the taxes go up on the rich, we understand that. That's part of what we need to do right now.
All right, well, we'll see where those members are as we get closer to actual votes. We know there are markups and things to come. In the meantime, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good seeing you.
Well, preventing lone wolf terrorists, some say it's almost impossible with the tools we have now. But our next guest says he has a way to stop them. So we'll report. You decide. Next. President Trump doubling down on calls to terminate the diversity visa program, saying the New York terror suspect brought nearly 24 people into the U.S. with him under that program. In a meeting with House Republicans at the White House, the president pivoted from discussing the GOP's long-awaited tax reform package to focusing on his plans for bolstering national security by getting rid of that lottery system.
This program grants visas not on a basis of merit, but simply because applicants are randomly selected in an annual lottery. And the people put in that lottery are not that country's finest.
The latest terrorism attack raising questions about lone wolf attacks and whether they're on the rise and if anything more can be done to prevent them. Here to talk about that is New Jersey Representative Josh Gottheimer. Good to have you with us tonight, sir.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Listen, a lone wolf doesn't need to have any contact formally with any kind of terrorist body. This guy, we're told, according to the charging documents, had thousands of disturbing ISIS pictures, videos of beheadings and all kinds of things. Yeah. How do we possibly get to that person?
Well, I think it's really about making sure that we're vigilant and we're coordinated. So I've introduced legislation called the FASTER Act, which does two things. One, it makes sure that the law enforcement has the tools to freeze assets of any suspected lone wolf terrorist.
Now, let's break that down first of all, because how does that work? I mean, is it upon arrest? What is the due process there for taking away assets?
Right, you want to ensure there's due process, but just like we have the ability to freeze international terrorists, we want to make sure you have the same tools to freeze assets of domestic lone wolf terrorists. We want to make sure we stop the money and stop the resources. But two, to your first point, how do you make sure that you're coordinated? And part of this is making sure law enforcement across the country is coordinated so that you can be vigilant. And when you see something, when there's something suspected, that we can be all over it. But it's multi-layered. You need to work with communities, and this is where law enforcement has done an incredible job. My co-sponsor on the legislation is a Republican, Brian Fitzpatrick, who was an FBI agent, right? So he worked these issues, and it's about making sure that you're able to see across the board and stop it before it happens. You can't stop everything, but do we have every tool in the arsenal? And that's what this is about.
You are a Democrat. Does this feel like one of those issues where there is bipartisan agreement because it's a life or death issue for Americans every single day?
I think this is one of those clear bipartisan issues, right? Protecting our country and protecting our families and our communities. There's nothing Democrat or Republican about it. That's what the oath we take is to protect, and I think it's essential. And we need to be vigilant. I live in the shadow of where the towers were, and I'll tell you that these are one of the issues when I talk to people about. They never bring up their party. They just say, "Are we doing everything possible?" And that's what this is about.
Okay, I want to read you a couple of tweets from the president. You know, his Twitter account was shut down briefly today.
I saw that on your show.
I'm like, what are we going to do? We got to get it back because we don't want to miss anything. But this is what he had to say earlier today. I'm calling on Congress to terminate the diversity lottery program that presents significant vulnerabilities to our national security. Congress must end chain migration so that we have a system that is security based. We need to make America safe. #USA. Where can you work with this president on some of these issues, or can you?
Well, this is an issue, as we've seen the last couple of days, that was addressed in a bipartisan way a couple of years ago as part of comprehensive immigration reform. I think we need to do everything possible to have secure borders, to make sure that we're vigilant and on who we're up against.
Would you pay for a wall?
Not what the president was. I think we need tough security, right? And I think there's many ways to get there. I'm not sure that is the answer what he's proposed, but there's plenty of solutions that there's bipartisan support for and that we've seen historically been tough. And I think we need to make sure that we're doing everything humanly possible that the only people who are in America are the people who want to be here and should be here. And that's
for the right reasons. There are bad guys who want to come here.
Yeah,
they're very successful at getting here.
For only the right reasons, the people who should be here.
What do you
mean
with the travel ban?
Well, I think, again,
we have three different. Are we on three now? We're on three
if you
at
can
least.
follow all the travel bans and what's going on in litigation, you should get an extra degree. I think this goes back to the same point. You need to be vigilant and make sure that we're doing everything possible to screen, and that means tough borders and tough checks. And I can't find anybody who doesn't believe in that. We want to protect our families and our communities. It's why the FASTER Act seemed to me a quick thing that a quick step that we can take to add tools to the arsenal, and then that's what it's all about for me.
I know you're in the middle of all of the tax discussions as well, so we'll have you back to talk about that.
I'd love to talk about that.
It'd be another place that if there could be some bipartisan.
I would love to find a bipartisan solution on tax reform. I'm for tax cuts. I'm not for raising taxes in Jersey, and unfortunately, this first part, it looks like it's going to raise tax on average of everybody in New Jersey, and that's not okay by me.
All right, come back and talk about that soon.
Thanks so much. Good to see you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Good to see you too. Ahead, a legal cross to bear. Should this century-old war memorial be taken down because of its symbolism? We're going to go to night court, and then you can decide next. In tonight's Night Court, where we present the stories to you, the jury, for your consideration, a church versus state showdown. The Supreme Court has traditionally taken a case-by-case approach to First Amendment cases like the one we're going to talk about. It's upheld tax exemptions for churches and mentions of God on U.S. currency, but it's also banned government-sponsored school prayer and imposed limits on public and parochial schools. Now a dispute over a so-called peace cross in Maryland. It's raising fresh concerns about religious symbols on public property. Federal appeals court has just ruled in favor of the American Humanist Association, which sued for removal of this 40-foot concrete cross erected almost a century ago to honor those who died serving this nation in World War I. The structure is now on state land and maintained with taxpayer funds. It's one of hundreds of these kinds of memorials featuring what opponents argue are solely Christian symbols. Critics say that's the problem.
This country is a diverse one. We have Buddhists, we have Hindus, we have non-theists, and we've always had some percentage of our population that were minority religion faiths. So representing those who have fallen with a monument that is only representative of one faith is just not universal enough.
First Liberty Institute, which is defending the veterans groups that help maintain the memorial, is vowing to take this issue all the way to the Supreme Court. Its Deputy Counsel Jeremy Dice joins me here. Good to see you tonight, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Okay, so you lost this case a couple of weeks ago. I want to read a little bit of what the Fourth Circuit had to say about this and why they decided that cross, a century old, put up by people who raise money in the community, has got to go. They said the monument here has the primary effect of endorsing religion and excessively entangles the government in religion. The Latin cross is the core symbol of Christianity, and here it is, 40 feet tall, prominently displayed in the center of one of the busiest intersections in Prince George's County, Maryland, just outside D.C., and maintained with thousands of dollars in government funds. Therefore, we hold that the purported war memorial breaches the wall of separation between church and state. So this essentially is on state land, it's using government money, and it's promoting Christianity. Why should it stay?
Well, the funny thing about it is that back almost 100 years ago now, moms that had their sons die in World War I, almost 88,000 men from America died in World War I. These moms got together and partnered with the American Legion, and they were the ones that started this whole project off. These Gold Star moms started this project off in Bladensburg. We're working with the American Legion at firstliberty.org to make sure this cross-shaped memorial stays standing here, because we want to continue to keep the faith with these mothers that fought so hard to honor their sons. Those 49 men of Prince George's County, Maryland, that fought for our freedoms. We should honor their sacrifice by having this cross-shaped memorial stay there.
But the group that wants to take it down, and they say it's just got to go. It's going to go away. It's not going to be moved. My understanding is that essentially it's going to be destroyed, from what I can understand.
That's frightening. And think about how close we are to Arlington National Cemetery and what that will mean there, where we have the Argonne Cross there with the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice. If this decision is allowed to remain, those memorials over there also are likely to be targeted as well. We need to continue to stay defending this cross in Bladensburg, Maryland. We forget things that we don't see. That's why we have these memorials there. This has been standing now for 90 years without complaint, honoring those 49 men who died defending freedom overseas. I'm reminded of one of the mothers, one of the very first mothers to turn over that fresh dirt in the ground there to build this memorial. She said, you know, I can't go to my son's grave overseas. I very much view this as my son's grave. gravestone. For that woman alone, we need to remain and keep the faith with these families to preserve this memorial.
So you know opponents view this as a religious symbol that's on secular land, and it's using taxpayer money to maintain it. So could there be a solution of, would the state cede the land, let it be available for private purchase? Could private groups then fund the upkeep of the cross? Is there a solution in there?
Oddly enough, it was on private land to begin with.
Right, and then it was
owned by the
transferred over
American
to
Legion.
state land.
And then when the highway got too big, remember this is the National Defense Highway, which is itself a World War I memorial as a highway. And then when the roads got busier, they expanded that highway. The workers couldn't bear to tear it down, so they made sure it stayed standing there and routed the traffic around it here. And so it has always been stood as a private memorial, something that was started by private individuals and have been preserved to defend the honor and the memory of these men of Bladensburg, Maryland.
And I know that you have applied to have the full Fourth Circuit rehear it. If they say no, I assume you're going to the Supreme Court, and we will cover it and see you there.
We will try to do so. I would encourage you to stay in touch at firstliberty.org.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Good to see you. Up next, how even visiting a sacred place can become controversial in this day and age when everything gets politicized. It is a few minutes before midnight here on the East Coast, just before 9 p.m. out west. And here's what's happening. President Trump is preparing to stop in Hawaii en route to Asia, as you recall, after the election last year. But before President Trump took office, President Obama visited the memorial and made a speech standing by the sunken battleship Memorial, a graveyard for sailors lost on the onset of World War II. President Obama said we must resist the urge to demonize those who are different, fair or unfair. That was seen by some in the media as a rebuke of the incoming president's worldview. Well, we're going to be there live when President Trump visits the memorial this hour tomorrow during a wreath-laying ceremony for those heroes lost at an age ago. Most watched, most trusted, most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night.